Well, it's the Monday after the Italian Grand Prix. Always kind of a nice moment, actually. I really enjoy Monza, and the weather's beautiful. It's driving to Malpensa. Been a very busy but enjoyable weekend. I spent a lot of time actually with the tifosi, the fans, this weekend out on the circuit in various grandstands, and after the race on the pit straight below the podium, kind of an event theatre that we take for granted, ensconced as we normally are. I say we, I'm talking about the media now. In the media centre, you look out and you see the fans and you take the odd picture and you think, wow, this is Monza, isn't it great? But when you actually go down there and you're waiting with the crowd for the drivers to walk out on that little path onto the podium, and you're part of the atmosphere, and the huge Ferrari flag is next to you, and they're letting off fireworks and the hooters, and it was, I love sport in general. And one thing I've always wanted to have done, and I guess I'll never do, wanted to do it with my dad actually. Sadly, he passed away in 2007, but one thing we always talked about doing, if we could, would be to spend a year just doing all the world's big sports events, just traveling around the world, doing the British Open, Lords, Australian Open, tennis, golf, whatever you want to do. I'm sure everybody has their own taste, but for me, that would be nirvana, really, I think, to be able to do that one day. Not that I ever will, but being below the podium at Monza made this much more of just another Italian Grand Prix for me. Bob Varsha, an American TV anchorman, sports anchorman, of whom I have enormous respect. I worked with him for several years at Speed. Once said about Monza, this is more than just a race. This is an event. And he was absolutely right. And that was what it was all about. There was a lot of booing for Lewis when he came out, but it was, as Jeff Willis later called it, pantomime booing. And because everybody was booing but laughing it, and they were loving Lewis's gestures in reply, and the fact that he was being so cool and waving to them, and I really enjoyed that, and that to me showed that Formula One is still very much alive and well in the hearts of hundreds of thousands, probably, well, millions of people. We know that, and again, you can live in a pretty cosseted environment, I think, which is the Formula One motorhome alley area, and you can constantly talk down Formula One. There's a lot of moaning and depression in Formula One. Always has been. The 40 years I've been in the sport, always been miserable people. No, let's completely rephrase that. There's all been subjects about which we can all be miserable, but Monza to me this year was a reminder that it's still pretty powerful, this sport, and I go away now pretty reassured that there will at least be an Italian Grand Prix at Monza next year. Thereafter, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult, only because Formula One is so expensive, and because Formula One as an industry hasn't done a very good job of looking after itself in generating new sources of income, and they're still dependent, the teams that is, on circuits and TV rights, basically. Sponsorship is fading rapidly from the equation, and that's really, they've only got themselves to blame there, I think, for not moving with the times. I think, I've got to say, I think FOM and CVC and Bernie have actually done a very good job in the circumstances of continuing the money supply through racing. But as for the way the teams are adapted to the new world of sponsorship, I don't think it's very impressive. So this opening gambit really was just to paint the picture of Monza. This was a Lewis Hamilton weekend, absolutely no doubt about that. Fastest in every practice session, fastest in all three qualifying sessions. Obviously started from the pole, led every lap, set fastest lap. Admittedly, right at the end, he was setting fastest laps like they were going out of style, because he was in sprint mode, because Mercedes were in panic mode, trying to get as big a margin as they could over Sebastian in case they got some sort of time penalty, which kind of gave the game away a little bit. I think because of that, I was pretty sure they would get a penalty, but interestingly they didn't, and I'm personally very glad they didn't, and not because I'm a Lewis fan, but because I hate to see wins like that taken away for reasons revolving 0.3 of a pound of a square inch or whatever it was, and I think that rule, which Craig Scarborough has explained and is explaining in an associate video on this playlist, is one that has grey areas and will need to be re-examined. But of course, after all this, the teams will be playing it very safe and very conservatively. If we didn't have all the dramas that we do have with tyres in Formula One, none of this would have arisen. Which brings me back to my point. A lot of people love to complain about Pirelli and the quality of the tyres. Equally, a lot of people say they would love to have Michelin in the sport, or perhaps Bridgestone back if ever they wanted to come back again. But my point is, why did we drive Michelin out of the sport in the first place? And I think all the people that were a part of that, and I'm talking 05 and 06 now, should still be called to account, because no company in the world was ever going to be less likely to cheat in Formula One than Michelin, and yet that is what they were directly accused of, and that is why they left the sport. Deliberate and flagrant breach of the technical regulations, I think was the phrase actually used at the time at the Italian Grand Prix in 06, and Michelin got out of the sport. We left them out to dry, hung them out to dry at Indy in 05. Formula One did nothing to protect Michelin there. And had we done neither of those things, Michelin probably would still be in Formula One, in my view, and we wouldn't have any of the issues that we have now with tyres. So until that situation is addressed, I don't think anybody should be out there complaining about Pirelli, because without Pirelli we probably wouldn't have any tyres at all. Sebastian Vettel drove superbly. What I was really impressed with about Sebastian's weekend was how he reacted after qualifying, when, because it was his turn to go out first at Monza at the back end of Q3, he did help Kimi to a time. Kimi was exactly the right position behind, 5 seconds behind. Kimi got the tow and out-qualified Sebastian at Monza. And for sure, when Sebastian, he put on a very brave face, I think, afterwards. And that's what I was impressed with. There was no angst there at all. But he would have been feeling that inside. There's no doubt when he would have woken up on Sunday morning thinking, you know, Monza, I've been done by Kimi here, he would have been very annoyed, and he drove, but he kept his demeanour, and he drove absolutely the heart out of that car, and I thought did a very good job. The only thing that I thought was slightly spurious was in the Ferrari press release afterwards, there was a sort of throwaway line at the end saying the tyres were okay. Well, actually, I spoke to Sebastian after the race, and the main difference actually between the Ferrari and the Mercedes was tyre degradation. The Ferrari had much greater tyre deg on both the medium and the soft compared with the Mercedes, and so I think to say the tyres were okay was a little bit vague, to be honest. There was the difference. There was obviously a difference in power as well, but Ferrari have done a nice job with the upgrade of that engine. You could argue, good job Mercedes did the upgrade that Lewis raced, because without that it would have been very, very close from Mercedes' point of view. So that was a good indication of how professional those two teams are these days, I think. So with the Ferrari chassis itself not doing quite as good a job with the tyres as Lewis was able to do in the Mercedes. I've actually written the race report for F1 Racing this month from Monza, so there's a lot of Lewis detail there on how he did work the weekend and how good the car felt on race day and how well he worked the diff settings on the car during the race. And all that can be read in the next edition of F1 Racing. Suffice it to say that Lewis, to me, just gets better and better, and it is very difficult when you're on a run and you're winning races and you've got a great car and a great team behind you. You are constantly aware that things can't go on forever. So how do you fight that inner feeling? And Lewis did it beautifully at Monza by just taking every session as it came and working hard at it, and not allowing the weekend to get ahead of him. And I was very impressed with that. There was there's always a lot of Lewis talk, nothing to do with the way he's actually driving the racing car, and that must be very distracting for him, I think. Oops, a bit of a drama there with a side road coming in. But as ever, he was a joy to watch down at the first chicane, which is a really nice corner. The more I look at the first chicane, the more I like it. I love the braking area there, how narrow the ribbon of road is on which to stop from high speed. And I love that little bit between the two, between the right and the left. There's just enough room to do something imaginative with the car there, and that's where Lewis always stands out in my mind. Rob Wilson's pointed this out as well. He's very good at putting on that little bit of additional left lock going into the second part of the corner, the left-hander, just to get the back end straighter. And nobody has more consistently straight, flat exits from that chicane than Lewis Hamilton. Very rarely does he look dramatic coming out of that corner, which is always a sign that he's doing it right. And watching the two Williams drivers, Felipe Massa cannot resist always just giving the back end a little bit of a flick on the exit curve from the first chicane. He loves it, and that's what he needs. That's what he needs to feel inside the car. But it's not the quickest way. It's not the quickest way in terms of being 300 meters down the road and what you're doing with the tires. Before we just end this first video, look back at Monza, a few comments about Williams. Valtteri Bottas was not happy after qualifying, and my understanding is that it was his turn to be in front of Massa, and he did help Massa to that time and was out qualified as a result, and he didn't look very happy about it. And Felipe did a good job all weekend being Felipe Massa, enjoying everything, enjoying his new contract at Williams for next year, and just looking like the Felipe we knew and loved from the great Ferrari days. Bottas, by contrast, and I've had confirmation yet again that it's Bottas, not Bottas. His mum was here for this race, not his dad, and he was sat there under massive pressure. It reminds me actually a little bit of Riccardo Patrese' mum turning up only the Italian Grand Prix to watch her son race. I remember I was at Williams at the time, and Riccardo had a good chance of winning one year. I think it might have been 91, and spun coming out of the Ascari chicane, and basically that was it, out of the race. And when he came back to the garage, the race was still on, I saw his mum go over and raised her umbrella at him in absolute disgust that her son could have done this. Riccardo sort of cowered back into the garage. No, but Valtteri's mum was not of that ilk at all. But he was very annoyed, and to me, this is the first time I've seen Valtteri a little bit lost and a little bit unsure of who Valtteri Bottas is and what he's going to be. The graph of development at the early days at Williams was very clear to see, and it's difficult to put this into words, but I would say he's possibly become a little bit too much of a professional Formula One driver and not a racing driver, and he's lost a little bit of that aggression that was there, which we saw as recently as last year. Let's see. You know, to me, Monza probably for Bottas was a pivotal moment. So we'll see how he comes back now in Singapore. He'll be wanting to be really good at Singapore, and at least to out-qualify Felipe. That's what it's all about. And it'll be interesting to see. That's an interesting battle shaping up there, I think. Williams did a good job overall. Slippery car, quicker at Monza through the air than for the same downforce, if you like, than Force India. But that's no disrespect to Force India. Williams did a very good job, and this was a circuit on which they were always going to go well. And of course, Felipe benefited from the end from Nico Rosberg's retirement with the engine fitted in very quick time on Saturday morning. This was his Spa engine, first fitted to the car in Canada, so it had a lot of miles on it. And had they not turned up the wick a bit, I'm sure it would have lasted, but he may not have finished third. He may have, he would have been fourth probably. But they did give him power, extra power towards the end, and it blew up as a result. So Mercedes will be ruining that, as will Nico, because this is a double whammy in favour of Lewis, of course. But that enabled Felipe to walk onto the podium and be welcomed almost as a Ferrari driver. I asked him afterwards, was it better to be on the podium as a Ferrari driver or a Williams driver? And he thought a little bit before saying, well, I just love being on the Monza podium. And I think that's what the crowd felt about him as well. On one final point, just going back to Nico, I'm a little bit over the place here, but just bear with me. Nico's high-spec, new-spec engine problem was some sort of coolant leak issue, which then contaminated the engine. When I asked if that engine had been irreparably damaged, the answer was we're not sure yet. So I suppose Mercedes has got so many engines compared with Ferrari, Honda, and well, not Ferrari, compared with Honda and Renault, that they're not particularly worried, I guess. But it was unfortunate for Nico because he was quick towards the end, as he usually is or has been in recent races, but it just didn't go in his way. But it was a Lewis Hamilton weekend, really, and it was a joy to watch him. As I've used that phrase about him, turn one. It was a joy to watch him perform in general, and he thoroughly deserved that win. I think it would have been very unjust from a sporting, humane point of view had he lost that win because of something that had no bearing at all on his performance.